So, ladies and gentlemen, in my presentation, I would like to talk about the Prospero registration. In the previous presentation, you heard about the PRISMA protocol. As Peter also said, PRISMA protocol recommends the prospective registration of the systematic review protocols, and today only one prospective registry for systematic reviews with health-related outcome exists, and this is the Prospero database, which is an international and open access database. But why is it important? First of all, it promotes and maintains the transparency. Second of all, it assists in minimizing the risk of bias. And last but not least, it helps to avoid the unnecessary duplication. The protocol registration is free of charge, and the submission must be in English. The Prospero provides a unique registration number, and this number can be cited later. The registration contains 40 questions, 22 are mandatory, and 18 are optional, and many of them are similar to those of the PRISMA checklist. The registration doesn't take so long. It's usually less than an hour. The registered protocol is allowed to be changed later, but a brief explanation is needed, and all edits will appear in a public record, so anyone can see that, for example, the review title was changed a month ago with certain reasons. As I said, Prospero database is an open access database, which means that the search is free of charge, and you can search without any kind of registration. But for the protocol registration, search is recommended to ensure that you are not duplicating a review that is being done by another team or has been registered previously. So, for example, if I'm going to write a meta-analysis about leptin, then I have to select the search link in the right column of the website. Then I can search for the leptin, and here you can see the results. The system found 31 records for leptin. Here you can see the registration date, the titles, and the review status, which can be ongoing, completed, and published. And if you click onto the title, you can check the detailed protocols. But not only a search, but also an access is needed for the protocol registration. So you have to obtain a username and a password by following the join link in the top right-hand corner of the website. And then you have to fill in these fields, for example, the first name, last name, and an email address. Once you have an access, you can sign in, and you will be able to select the Register Your Review Now button, and you can start the exact registration. As I mentioned earlier, Prospero registration contains 40 questions. In my slides, the mandatory fields are highlighted, and asterisks represent them. So the next question is the review title. The title should contain the study design and the parts of the PICO, so the patient, the intervention, the comparison group, and the outcome. The next question is optional. It is important if the systematic review is in language other than English. The anticipated or actual start date This date should be after the completion of the protocol, but before the formal screening of the identified studies against the eligibility criteria begins. The anticipated completion date, this is the date by which the review is expected to be completed. And here comes the most critical point of the registration, the stage of review at time of the registration. First of all, you have to tick that the review hasn't yet started, and after it, you have to tick the relevant started and completed boxes. The red circle represents the critical boxes. If the data extraction or the risk of bias assessment or the data analysis is completed, the registration won't be accepted. So please do not tick these boxes. Later you can update it. In the next two questions, you have to give the name and the email address of the contact person. The contact person can be the lead reviewer or any other representative of the review team. And if you want, you can give the address and the phone number of the contact person, but it is optional. In the next question, you have to give the full title of organization affiliation of the review. And then, if you want, you can give the name, the title, and an organization affiliation of each member of the review team. After it, you have to describe the sources of the funding for the systematic review. And the next question is the conflict of interest. If there isn't any, you have to state it. The next question is optional. Collaborators are individuals or organizations who are working on the systematic review, but who are not listed as a member of the review team. In the next question, you have to state the question to be addressed by the systematic review, and it should contain the parts of the PICO. After it, you have to give the details of the sources to be searched, and the search date, and the restrictions during the search. And if it is available, you can give a link to the search strategy. After it, you have to give a short description of the condition and disease being studied, for example, the type 2 diabetes. And then you have to give the summary criteria for the participants and population. It should contain the detailed inclusion and exclusion criteria. This question and the next two questions, the intervention and exposure and comparator counters, are the parts of the PICO. So here you have to give the details of the P, I, and C from the PICO question. After it, you have to give the details of the study design eligible for inclusion in the systematic review, for example, case control studies or cohort studies. If there isn't any restriction, you have to state it. The next question is optional. Here you can give any information in connection with the inclusion and exclusion criteria that wasn't stated previously. Then you have to define the primary outcomes and the measurements of the outcome. And if your systematic review has a secondary outcome, you have to list it in the next question. If there isn't any, you have to state it again. The data extraction field is optional. Here you can give the procedure selecting studies or extracting data. And the next question is the risk of bias assessment. You heard a lot about it from Zsolt previously. That's an example, for example, a Cochrane risk of bias tool. In the next question, you have to give the details of the classical statistical analysis. And if you use additional statistical analysis, you have to list them in the next question, and you have to give the details of them. For example, if you use a subgroup analysis or a meta-regression. The next question is the type and method of the review. For example, it's a meta-analysis, a network meta-analysis, or a simple systematic review. The other questions are optional. Only giving the keywords is highly recommended because keywords help the users find your meta-analysis or systematic review in the register. The next question is the review status. At the time of the registration, it is ongoing. Later, after the registration, you can and you have to update it. And the last two questions are optional. Here, you can give any other information, or later, if the systematic review is published, you can give a link to the publication. And when you are ready, the registration form can be sent to the Prospero administrators by clicking on the Submit button. And after the submission, your registration form will be checked against the eligibility criteria for the Prospero. You will get a notification within 5 working days. And here there are 2 possibilities. Hopefully it will be accepted. The other 2 are the following. It can be rejected, or the administrator can ask for a revision. I hope this short presentation was helpful. Thank you for your attention.